In this video, I use white paint, remove clear film from a wing, paint the rivets by hand and compare two models. Hello fellow modelers! Indeed, I decided to build my first aircraft model in 32 scale, and it cannot be otherwise than Focke Wulf, because it is my favorite aircraft. The choice of a kit was straightforward this time, because the only one available is Hasegawa. I of course download a lot of photos from internet, but I have this nice walk around paperback which helped me to figure out some details. And as usual, I bought a few resin correction details from Quick Boost and from Attak with lovely photo etch parts including landing flaps. Besides, this model will be challenged because I will not make rivet holes as you already know from my previous models. But I will try to make it more realistic with a new positive rivet decals made by HGW. The plastic kit itself is nice, with almost no details. I'm used to add smaller models, so I'm a little bit confused about large flat plastic parts. It will be like a paint dull plastic board. Here you can nicely see the plastic and resin correction part side by side. Is it worth it? I don't know. I expected that the 32 scale model would have tons of parts and details, but no, quite the opposite. So that means more work for me, and the model will need some minor modifications. Okay, I must admire that the details on instrument panel are lovely, and therefore I decided not to use photo etch parts for the cockpit. Consequently, I must modify a few plastic pieces, like these rudder pedals. The original one looks like a emmental cheese, so if you want to make it more authentic, you must drill out a lot of holes. In the kit is a crank for closing or opening canopy from one piece, and it looks monolithic. Thus, I separated lever, then drill holes, and in the end turn a new handle from a residual plastic sprue. Such a routine. Okay, I don't want to discuss you with the details, so flaps in the kit are nice and you don't need to modify them, in the case of if you will make them in the closed position. But if you will decide to make them in open position, I can suggest throw them to the spare part box and make a new one from photo etch parts. The small parts is not a problem to bend with the tweezers, but for a narrow flat parts is handy metal bending tool. I use for gluing metal parts ordinary superglue. I think the result worth it. However, that was only the beginning, so more fun with the details. The other section, which is very simplified, is wheel well. Luckily, I also have a few metal parts and also made a few minor adjustments. I recently bought a Loctite 60-second universal glue. It has consistency like a gel superglue, but drying time is slower, and thus you can correct position and orientation of metal parts. So back to the cockpit. There were a few missing details that I modified. The seat shape is incorrect and the plastic is too thick. I use a micro drill again with a soft milling cutter. Yes, this is slightly better. I covered the surface with a lacquer silver color, and for sketches I use the chipping fluid. You can use water-based hairspray instead. I moisten the surface with water, and I use a toothpick for small scratches, because with a paintbrush you will make scratches randomly. In the kit are decals for different instruments and indicators. I don't use the whole decal sheet at once, but I'm cutting out small pieces and apply them on the precise position. Then I use decal chemicals which make them softer and thus will nicely copy plastic details. If you want to apply metal flaps, you must almost every time remove a lot of plastic from wings. If you use some electric tool, try to work with a low RPM, because you can easily deform plastic with a heat from friction. And again, do not use superglue for large metal parts and instead use 60 seconds glue. It will prevent many troubles if you will accidentally glue flaps obliquely. As you can see, you can easily correct the position. You probably think now that it is shame that I didn't open any cover or at least made some scratchable modifications. Yes, it is shame, so I will create fuselage internal construction with a fuel tank. Fill the seam lines inside is tricky, so I simply cover the whole bottom section with a plastic board. I use for construction styrene plastic profiles and for more difficult shapes lead wires. It remains to add a few push-pull rods for moving parts like elevator rudder and some electrical cables. The funny thing is that all will be hidden inside of the model, and why I'm doing this I do not know. The last interior section is part of the engine, which is visible from Revell. This D version of Focke-Wulf had Juncker's piston inverted V12 engine. Germans needed bomber interceptor with better performances than radial engine versions. Thus, it was necessary to modify fuselage length with a new engine and to preserve a center of gravity. Thus, the wings are the same, but the fuselage is extended. I heard a few times that this type of Focke-Wulf is ugly, but I personally like it because it looks narrow and the shapes are modern, almost like a P-51 Mustang. I added into the engine section a few tubes and wires. It is fun if you compare it how it looks before and after. German gun barrel had muzzle booster which had conical shape. You cannot achieve this shape with ordinary drill bit, therefore I use a hypodermic needle. They are very sharp and you can use them like a drill. The replacement resin set is slightly smaller than the plastic one, so I must fill gaps with epoxy putty. The second replacement part is for engine cowling. In the kit is a few millimeters smaller. I think it is not a problem to extend the plastic part with the profiles, but the resin is nice and easy to use. If you want to make wheels more authentic, you should make a tire a little bit flattened. The pressure inside the wheels is usually quite high, therefore deformation is insignificant. I dissolve Tamiya white pate with a lacquer thinner, therefore I can apply it on the model with a paintbrush. The drying time is more or less 5 hours. You can dissolve pate and remove it from decals with a super glue debonder. This type is friendly to plastic, so you wipe only the pate. You can mask painted parts and details with masking tape, but handy is a black foam. You can cover the cockpit with a canopy. If you will use PVA glue, you can easily remove it after painting. The last step before painting is clean plastic from dust and grease with a soapy water or alcohol. Now I am unifying surface with a grey primer. It will reveal me imperfections like scratches, seam lines or sink marks. The drying time is 1 hour, so meanwhile I paint propeller cone with a typical German spiral. The easy way is just to use a mask. Edart has a few sets for different scales and variants, so you can choose what you need. I sprayed the first layer with a lacquer silver color and white and black with acrylic. The acrylic doesn't adhere to the surface strongly and you can use this as an advantage and make a realistic sketches with a toothpick. I applied rivet decals under color, but after 2 layers are hardly visible, so therefore I am painting rivets by hand. The primer is dry. I filled some pan lines with a putty, and therefore I must describe them with a razor saw. If you want to imitate scratches, then the best technique are scratches. I'm not painting the whole model with a silver color, but only areas which are usually abraded by maintenance. On the silver color, chipping varnish. So painting, I use acrylic lacquer colors, which are resilient against oil or enamel weathering chemicals. For spraying, I use an airbrush with 0.3 mm nozzle. For post-chaining and detail work is handy smaller nozzle like 0.2 and 0.15. The advantage of large-scale models is that you do not need a mask for camouflage marking, and you can paint it by hand. The basic painting is done, so now the whole thing is about making the model less uniform. If you are making small 72 scale models, you only need the rivet lines and then apply wash. The model then looks nice even without advanced shading, like here. But with large model and large surface is tricky. I got from Model Emporium for testing this Spring Stains template made by Uschi van der Osten. You can make the same effect with a salt technique, but I never like it much, and thus this template is interesting feature. Therefore I'm trying to paint many stains and pan lines with darker shades and basic artificial shading. I call this technique pre-post shading because it is pre-shading on color. The stains are too much pronounced, so I am unifying color with a base grey shade. However, it is still not the end, now it's time for lighter shades. The flaps were made from fabric, so I'm spraying shading with light grey color. Try to use highly diluted color and low pressure, something like 15 psi. You can repeat the whole process a few times, until you will be satisfied with the result. If you think that the result is too light, then you are right, although you must count on weathering, varnish, rivets and more painting with oils, and after each step will become shade a little bit darker. You can see in the corner that decals are from 1986 and are not usable. If you add them to the water, they fall apart. Thus, I use them as a template and make my own mask. You will need only a paper masking sheet and sharp blade. Good practice is also to stick the paper on your skin a few times before you will place it on your model. The Tamiya masking paper usually has a strong adhesion, and by this trick you will make it less sticky. The dilution for spraying roundless should be less thinned. If you will add a lot of thinner, then there is a high risk of a leak of color under the mask. Thus I prefer a low pressure around 15 psi and more dense dilution. The final result is not the best, but after rivets and weathering it will be okay. Do you remember? I sprayed silver color and chipping varnish under color. Thus it only remains to moisten surface with water and make some nice random scratches. You can use a toothpick like before, but the surface is large, so I use a brush with hard fibers. The chipping varnish is good servant but bad master. If you apply masking tape, you will easily remove the color from the surface. Therefore, it is essential to protect paint job with a resilient lacquer varnish. Even so, you will never achieve perfect protection and you can easily peel off color. Therefore, I was a little bit scared from the next step. So rivets. The HGW is making set with already prepared rivet lines for precisely this type of plane and kit. It looks like an ordinary decal sheet with dots, but it is printed opposite, so you can remove the clear film from the surface. After a few seconds in water you can transfer rivets on the wing. For proper application you can use old Mr. Mark setter. However, if you have a new Neo setter, then you should instead use original HGW liquid. You can correct position like with ordinary decals. The essential is to remove after application bubbles and water with a paper napkin. Do not move with the decals afterward and let it dry properly for 5 hours. Now a little bit of magic. When the decals are dry, you can remove the top transparent film from the surface. In the manual is described that you should apply the rivets on primer, but I made a few tests and after 2 or 3 layers of color they almost vanished. So therefore I decided to apply them on the color. It was quite tricky to handle all the steps. I do not want silver rivets on the whole model, thus I am spraying a very thin layer of the color and of course repeat a weathering shading. The silver dots created a strong color contrast, and if you will spray with a highly diluted color over, you will unify them with the surface but not entirely. You can make rivets again more pronounced with a sandpaper, primarily around maintenance areas. It will be lovely detail and more realistic. It is time for oil painting. You don't need some expensive artistic oil paints with a perfect coverage properties, because we need them only for minor shading and weathering. I personally like Abteilung or Czech Ampton. I dilute oil paint with an odorless thinner because it isn't aggressive. You can nicely play with a paint and you can try different approaches. For example, you can try highly diluted oil paint and make small dots. Or you can moisten with a thinner the whole area and then blend the color. The only disadvantage of oil paint is drying time, so if you are pleased with the result, let it dry for 2 days. I know this time is painting a little bit overkill, but you ask for 32 scale model, so here you go. You probably think that the rivets are not very pronounced and raised, but if you polish the surface with a dry paper towel, just slightly, then from this angle you nicely see them. The final effect is very satisfying. I chose color marking from Operation Bodenplatte from 1945. It was the last defiance of the German Luftwaffe. They destroyed more than 300 Allied aircrafts and more than 200 were damaged. However, Luftwaffe lost 280 fighters, so it was Pyrrhic victory. I, of course, cannot forget at seatbelts. Inside of HGW Rivets set was this nice laser-cut fabric belts. In this scale it's quite straightforward for assembling and you don't need magnifying glass. The result looks very authentic. The best and easy technique for exhaust stains is again oil paint. I used an airbrush for recent models, but the result with airbrush looks very artificial and uniform. So we are almost in the end. It requires to make tons of details and paint them. I would like to include in the video all, however in this case the final edit would have like 1 hour or more. So I tried to choose only the most important and interesting sections. It was my first aircraft model in this scale, so I wanted to make it more realistic and tried new approaches. I spent almost 2 months with it, but I think the result is interesting. So that is all, thank you for watching and see you next time. Here is the finished model.